My name is Sophie John, a major in the United States Army. At 37, I've spent 15 years defending this country on the invisible fronts of cyber warfare. But no amount of training could have prepared me for the cold, iron gate of my own childhood home. I stood there in my dress uniform, fresh from a long overseas tour, only to hear my sister Claire's voice crackle through the intercom, colder than the Virginia October wind. "What do you want?" She didn't ask. She spat. "This isn't your home anymore. Get lost before I call the cops." When I tried to reason, my mother's voice cut in from behind her, sharp as a razor. "We don't have a daughter named Sophie. Our daughter died a long time ago." They didn't know that before my grandfather passed, he had given me an old key. Not a key to the house, but a key to a truth that could burn it all to the ground. If you've ever been treated like a stranger by your own family, let me know in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe, because this story is proof that honor is something no one can take from you. The house stood on a quiet, tree-lined street in suburban Virginia, a monument to a past that felt like another lifetime. My grandfather, a proud World War II veteran, had built it with his own two hands, sinking his love and his savings into every beam and brick. I remembered the scent of my grandmother's rose bushes that once lined the walkway, a sweet, welcoming perfume that defined summer for me. But that scent was gone now, replaced by the faint, unmistakable odor of damp and neglect. It clung to the air, a sign of a deeper decay. I stood on the sidewalk, my duffel bag at my feet, the pressed fabric of my Army service uniform feeling stiff and alien in this place. The porch light, which used to cast a warm, golden glow, now flickered with a sickly, intermittent pulse. It blinked on and off, like a surveillance camera coldly assessing a threat. I took a steadying breath, the kind I take before breaching a hostile network, and walked up the familiar concrete path. My hand felt heavy as I lifted it to press the doorbell. For a moment, there was only silence. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, foolishly anticipating the sound of footsteps, the turn of a lock, a warm embrace. Instead, a tinny, distorted voice crackled from the small speaker of the intercom. "Who is it?" The voice was stripped of all warmth, all recognition. Or perhaps the recognition was deliberately withheld. A chill, colder and sharper than any I'd felt on a windswept tarmac in Germany, snaked its way up my spine. It was a premonition, a tactical warning from my gut that was more terrifying than facing down a state-sponsored cyber attack. This wasn't an anonymous enemy on the other side of the world. This was the voice of my sister, Claire. I leaned closer to the intercom, my own voice tight as I tried to keep it even. "It's me, Claire. It's Sophie." I added, as if it were necessary, "I'm home on leave." The silence that followed was an eternity. It stretched and pulled, thick with a hostility I could feel through the cold metal of the gate. I could picture her inside, standing in the foyer, her hand hovering over the talk button, deciding what words would cut the deepest. When she finally spoke, the distorted voice was dripping with venom. "You're not welcome here." The words hit me like a physical blow. I flinched. "What? Claire, what are you talking about?" "This is private property," she snapped, the voice gaining a cruel confidence. "You need to leave, now. Or I'm calling 911 for trespassing." Trespassing? The word echoed in the sudden emptiness inside my chest. Trespassing? In the house where I took my first steps? In the yard where my grandfather taught me how to throw a baseball? The absurdity of it was suffocating. This had to be a joke, a sick, twisted joke. A flicker of desperate hope ignited in me. "Claire, stop messing around, just let me in. Where's Mom?" "Mom doesn't want to see you," she retorted, her voice flat and final. "Neither does Dad." "You made your choice, Sophie. You chose the Army. You chose to abandon this family. Now, you get to live with the consequences." Before I could even process the sting of her accusation, another voice joined the assault. It was my mother's, Susan's, somehow managing to sound even more shrill and venomous through the cheap speaker. "Is it still out there?" she screeched, the word "it" landing like a spit in my face. "Claire, call the police. Tell them a stranger is harassing us. We don't have a daughter. She's been dead to us for years. Dead to us. Each word was a sledgehammer, cracking the foundations of who I thought I was. I have faced down threats that could cripple national infrastructure. I have stared into the digital abyss and held my ground. I could face bullets and bombs. But I had no defense against this. This weapon, wielded by my own mother, was designed to annihilate my very existence. My breath hitched, my vision swam. The world tilted on its axis. Just then, the familiar blue and red lights of a police cruiser washed over the street. It wasn't racing, just slowly patrolling the neighborhood. The car pulled to a stop beside me, and an older officer with a kind, weathered face rolled down his window. He recognized the uniform, the ribbons on my chest. "Major John," he asked, a respectful smile touching his lips. "Welcome home. Are you visiting family?" The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. Before I could find my voice to answer, a low hiss broke the silence. The black wrought iron gate began to slide shut. It moved with a smooth, automated finality, a mechanical and unforgiving wall rising between me and my past. It was a definitive rejection, a public excommunication performed with cold efficiency. The officer watched, his smile fading into a look of confusion and concern. The gate closed with a soft, final clang, the lock engaging with a decisive click. The connection was severed. I was on the outside. As the police car slowly drove away, leaving me alone under the sickly flickering of the porch light, a strange thing happened. The searing pain in my chest didn't turn into tears. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The soldier in me took over. The pain was compartmentalized, filed away. It transformed, crystallizing into something hard, cold, and clear. Resolve. As an intelligence officer, my job was to see the patterns, to anticipate the threats. But here, in the one place I should have felt safe, I had been completely blind. I'd missed all the signs. I had been naive. I stared at the house, no longer a home, but a fortress occupied by the enemy. They had drawn the battle lines. They had declared war. And they had forgotten one crucial piece of intel. Major Sophie John never backs down from a fight. Standing alone in the encroaching darkness, I whispered the words to myself, a silent vow that hung in the cold Virginia air. This war, I will not lose. But as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a hollow ache, a single, tormenting question began to echo in the silence of my mind. Why? When? When did it all begin? I didn't leave that night. A soldier doesn't abandon the field after the first volley. I drove to a 24-hour rental place and traded my government sedan for something anonymous. A beat-up, dark blue Ford pickup with a dent in the passenger door. It was perfect. I found a spot down the street, tucked under the deep shadows of an old oak tree, and cut the engine. From there, I had a clear line of sight. My mission had changed. This house was no longer a home. It was a target, and I was on surveillance. The lights in the living room cast a warm amber glow onto the lawn. It was a picture of suburban tranquility, a disgusting, beautiful lie. I knew that warmth was a facade, hiding a coldness that could freeze you to the bone. Sitting there in the dark, the scent of stale coffee and old vinyl filling the truck's interior, the question from before returned, echoing in the silence. Why? And as if on cue, the floodgates of memory opened, pulling me back into the museum of my own past. I was at the Thanksgiving dinner table. I could almost smell the rich aroma of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie. The entire family was there, the air thick with forced cheerfulness. My father, Richard, stood at the head of the table, holding his wineglass. He always loved making toasts, loved being the patriarch, holding court. To family, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. And to my beautiful daughter, Claire. He smiled, a politician's smile, and gestured toward my sister. She's just been named chair of the PTA's fundraising committee. We're all so proud of her. Polite applause went around the table. Claire, preening, gave a little wave. I was 17, and I had just received my acceptance letter. a full-ride scholarship to the United States Military Academy at West Point. It was the culmination of years of relentless work, sacrificing weekends and high school parties for study sessions and physical training. It was a monumental achievement. When the applause for Claire died down, I cleared my throat, waiting. My father glanced at me, his smile faltering for a second. He took a sip of his wine, then gave a curt nod in my direction. And, to Sophie as well, he said, the words an obvious afterthought. She'll be taking care of herself, it seems. That was it. My life's dream was reduced to a footnote. At least she can take care of herself. The words weren't a compliment, they were a dismissal. A convenient excuse to redirect the spotlight back to where it always belonged, on Claire. The memory shifted, pulling me further back to the bedroom we once shared. It was a perfect diorama of our family's values. Claire's side of the room was a shrine to herself. The wall was a chaotic collage of cheap satiny ribbons, blue, red, yellow, from local beauty pageants. A flimsy plastic tiara from when she was crowned Little Miss Fairfax sat on her bookshelf like a holy relic. My side of the wall was bare. It wasn't because I had no accomplishments. I had plenty. First place in the state science fair, a box full of academic decathlon medals, a certificate for a perfect SAT score, but none were ever displayed. One afternoon, I came home to find my mother carefully taking them down from my bulletin board. "What are you doing?" I asked, a knot of dread in my stomach. She didn't look at me, just continued placing my medals into a dusty shoebox. "We need to keep these safe, honey," she said, her voice cloyingly sweet. "We wouldn't want Claire to feel bad, would we? We have to be careful not to make her feel insecure." Then she looked at me, her eyes filled with a strange kind of pity that made my skin crawl. "Sophie, you're strong, and you're smart. You don't need these things to know your worth. Claire. Well, Claire is different. She's more sensitive." That was the first time I truly understood. My strengths weren't assets to my family. They were liabilities. My intelligence, my independence. They were not qualities to be celebrated. They were reasons to be ignored, justifications for my erasure, all to protect my sister's fragile ego. I was being punished for not needing them enough. Only one person ever saw me. My grandfather, William. He was a quiet man of few words but profound integrity. He saw the soldier in me long before I ever put on a uniform. After my mother packed away my awards, he took me to his workshop in the garage. The air smelled of sawdust and old motor oil. Over the next week, he built me a small chest out of solid oak. He sanded it until it was smooth as glass and stained it a deep brown. On the lid, he carefully carved my name, Sophie. He presented it to me with a solemn look in his clear blue eyes. "This," he said, his voice a low rumble, "is your footlocker, Sophie. For my future general." From then on, every time I brought home an award, we would have a small ceremony. He'd take the medal or certificate, inspect it with grave importance, and then place it carefully inside the oak box. It was our secret ritual, our silent rebellion. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you that you're not good enough," he told me once, his hand on my shoulder. "You have the blood of a soldier in you. That's a damn sight more valuable than any plastic crown." Now, sitting in the cold truck, a wave of panic washed over me. The box. Where was my grandfather's box, my footlocker? It was still in the house, in my old closet. A new, terrible thought surfaced. Maybe they'd already found it. Maybe they'd tossed it out with the trash. Or worse, thrown it in the fireplace, letting my only source of validation, my only proof of being seen, turn it to ash. The sky began to lighten, shifting from inky black to a bruised purple, then to a pale, hazy gray. As the first rays of sun cut through the morning mist, a small white work van from a local real estate company pulled up. A man in a polo shirt got out, grabbed a sign, and walked onto the lawn. The same lawn where my grandmother's roses used to grow. With a series of dull, rhythmic thuds, he hammered a sign into the soft earth. It wasn't a "coming soon" sign. It was a stark, red and white sign that screamed with finality. "For sale." Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a spontaneous act of cruelty. This was a long-term plan. They hadn't just kicked me out, they were erasing me, selling off the legacy my grandparents had built, severing my last physical tie to my own history. All my years of service, my long deployments, the distance I had to keep, they hadn't seen it as a sacrifice. They had seen it as an opportunity. A window to cut me out, clean and final, and cash in. A bitter, acidic taste filled my mouth. I had dedicated my life to defending my country, missing holidays, birthdays, and funerals, all for a greater duty. And for what? So the very people I was protecting could use my absence to orchestrate the ultimate betrayal. The question that had been haunting me all night finally found its answer. My sacrifice meant nothing to them. It was just a means to their end. So what was it all for? The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the street, but I felt trapped in a cold, permanent twilight. The red and white for sale sign was a brutal, final punctuation mark on a story I didn't even know was being written. The questions from the night before, the why and the when, had been answered. It was all for this, for money, for a clean break, for my complete and total erasure. Sitting in the cab of that beat-up Ford, the engine long since gone cold, I felt a familiar sensation I hadn't experienced since my first day of basic training. The crushing, suffocating weight of being utterly and completely alone. My training had prepared me for isolation on the battlefield, but there was always the knowledge of a command structure, of a support system, of a nation behind you. This was different. This was a war of one. My own family was the enemy. Who do you call when the threat is coming from inside the wire? My hand, numb and heavy, reached for my phone. I mindlessly scrolled through the contacts, a digital Rolodex of my life. Colonels, sergeants, fellow officers, a few acquaintances from past assignments. There was no one I could call, no one who could possibly understand the specific nature of this wound. My thumb hovered over my commanding officer's name, then dismissed it. What would I say? Sir, requesting permission to engage in a domestic dispute with hostiles who also happened to be my parents. Defeated, I kept scrolling until a name from a different lifetime appeared on the screen. Anna Clay. We hadn't spoken in years, not since a brief reunion after my graduation from West Point. We'd been inseparable at Virginia Tech for the 2 years I was there before transferring. She was brilliant, fiercely loyal, and had a laugh that could fill a stadium. While I went into the disciplined world of the military, she had stormed the chaotic world of civil law. The last I'd heard, she'd made a name for herself as a shark in the courtroom, a lawyer who didn't just fight for her clients, she eviscerated their opponents. My finger hesitated over her name. It felt like a lifetime ago. Would she even remember me? Would she think I was crazy? The despair churning in my gut gave me the answer. I had nothing left to lose. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring. Anna Clay. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, warm, confident, and with an undercurrent of no-nonsense energy. I cleared my throat, forcing the emotion out of my voice, switching into the only mode I had left. Anna, it's Sophie John. There was a half-second pause. Sophie? My God, it's been forever. Are you okay? You sound... I cut her off, my words clipped and precise. A field report. I have a situation, I said. I need legal counsel. There was no hesitation, no 20 questions, no. What's this all about? Just the immediate, unwavering loyalty I remembered. Send me your coordinates, she said, her voice instantly shifting from friendly to focused. I'm on my way. An hour later, the generic anonymity of a downtown coffee shop, the Daily Grind, became our makeshift command center. The place buzzed with the morning rush, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of conversations, the clatter of ceramic mugs. The air was thick with the comforting, all-American scent of dark roast coffee and freshly baked cinnamon buns. It was a bizarrely normal backdrop for the wreckage of my life that I was about to unpack. Anna strode in, looking exactly like the legal powerhouse she had become. Sharp black suit, a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. and the same intelligent, focused eyes. She gave me a quick, firm hug that conveyed more than words ever could, then got straight to business. She didn't ask me how I was feeling, she didn't offer empty platitudes, she was a professional. And she knew that emotion was a distraction. She needed facts. "Talk to me, Sophie," she said, pulling a tablet from her briefcase. From the top. What did they say? Word for word. I recounted the entire ugly sequence of events from the intercom to the "for sale" sign. My voice was flat, detached, as I recited the words that had been seared into my memory. Anna listened, her fingers flying across the screen of her tablet, her expression unreadable. She was a data processor, a strategist, and right now, that was exactly what I needed. When I finished, she simply nodded. "Okay." She typed for another minute, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she looked up. The house was transferred 3 months ago via a quitclaim deed to a limited liability company, an LLC called Raven Crest Holdings. My blood ran cold. It was real. It was official. Anna turned the tablet to face me. On the screen was a scanned copy of the deed transfer. And there, on the seller's signature line, was my name, Sophie John, scrawled in a messy, looping script that looked nothing like my own. "That's not my signature," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know," Anna replied, a grim smile touching her lips for the first time. "Your signature has the discipline of a parade formation. This looks like a chicken trying to write its name after 3 drinks." She zoomed in on another part of the document. "And here's where they got sloppy. The notary." She tapped the name. "This guy had his license revoked 6 months ago for fraud. He's already facing charges in 2 other counties." She looked at me, her eyes glinting with the thrill of the hunt. "They made a mistake, Soph. A big one." For the first time in 24 hours, a tiny crack appeared in the wall of despair, and a sliver of light shone through. Hope. The chaotic, overwhelming pain was being organized. It was being converted into data, into evidence, into a clear and objective target. And data was a language I understood. This was a battlefield I could navigate. Anna leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "Here's what we do. We fight back, and we fight back hard." She held up 3 fingers. "Step 1, I'm filing for a temporary restraining order this afternoon. That will freeze the sale immediately. They won't be able to touch the property." She held up a second finger. "Step 2, we subpoena the crooked notary. We squeeze him, and he'll flip on whoever paid him to forge that document. My money's on your brother-in-law, Mark." And finally, the third finger. "Step 3, we file a civil suit against Richard John and Claire Thatcher for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and unjust enrichment. We're going to take back what's yours." She leaned back, letting the plan settle in the air between us. The knot in my stomach was still there, but it was no longer a knot of fear. It was a knot of coiled, focused energy. "They thought you were just a lone soldier, isolated and out of your element," Anna said, looking me straight in the eye. "They thought you would just get overwhelmed and give up." She smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "They have no idea you've got an entire army behind you." While Anna launched the first wave of our legal assault from her office in Richmond, I settled into my new, temporary role. I was no longer just the victim. I was the forward operating base. The truck became my post, the quiet suburban street, my area of operations. My mission, surveillance and pattern analysis. While Anna fought on the legal front, I would gather intelligence on the ground. I didn't just sit and wait. An officer is never idle. I began my work methodically, observing the house with the detached focus of a trained analyst. I noted the mailman's arrival time, the schedule of the garbage pickup, the way the morning sun hit the front windows. These were the rhythms of a normal life, a baseline. And against that baseline, anomalies begin to stand out. It didn't take long to find one. For 3 consecutive nights, the pattern was identical. At precisely 2 a.m., a dim light would flick on in the basement. It wasn't the bright, even light of a normal room, but a low, concentrated glow. It stayed on for exactly 1 hour, then vanished. 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. Like clockwork. It was too precise to be random. It It was a schedule. My suspicion was confirmed when Anna forwarded me a copy of the utility bills she'd obtained through a legal request. The electricity usage for the past 3 months had quintupled. It was an astronomical spike, the kind of consumption you'd expect from a small machine shop, not a residential home. Yet, a quick search of the town records showed no business permits registered to the address. My gut, honed by years of identifying threats in cyberspace, was screaming at me. This was bigger than a simple real estate scam. This was an active, ongoing operation, and it was happening right under my grandfather's roof. The next day, the town was hosting its annual fall festival. It was a sea of Americana, families in flannel shirts, the smell of hot apple cider and caramel corn, the cheerful sounds of a local country band. For me, the crowd wasn't a source of comfort, it was cover. A perfect place to observe without being observed. Blending in, I bought a cup of cider and stood near a booth selling oversized pumpkin pies, my eyes scanning, my senses on high alert. As I was watching the pie judging contest, I felt a slight bump. A young boy, no older than 10, darted past me, his face a blur. He pressed something into my hand and was gone before I could even register what happened, disappearing back into the river of people. I looked down. It was a crumpled-up paper napkin. My first instinct was to drop it, a potential threat, but I smoothed it out. Scrawled in the shaky, deliberate handwriting of an old man were a few simple words. "Meet me at the old stable behind the church. Don't let anyone see you. A friend of William." My heart hammered against my ribs. There was only one person it could be. Ethan Miller, a retired Marine Master Sergeant, Vietnam veteran, and my grandfather's closest friend. They'd met at the local VFW hall years ago and were inseparable until the day my grandfather died. Ethan was the last living link to what I thought of as my old world. The old stable smelled of hay, worn leather, and time. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light cutting through the warped wooden slats of the walls. Ethan was waiting for me in the shadows, leaning against a support beam. He was 70, but he still stood with the ramrod straight posture of a Marine. His eyes, though surrounded by wrinkles, were as sharp and clear as ever. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "They're not just stealing the house, kid," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It was the voice of a man who had seen too much. "What have you seen, Sergeant?" I asked, falling back into the familiar language of respect. "Twice a week, always after midnight," he began. "Unmarked black panel vans pull into the driveway. That no-good husband of Claire's, Mark, is always there to meet them. They unload heavy crates, sealed tight. They don't look like ordinary household goods." He paused, his gaze hardening. "And there's something else you need to know. The word on the street. Your sister has been telling people you've got a bad case of PTSD, that you're unstable. She's trying to discredit you before you can even make a move." A cold fury, sharp and clean, cut through me. It wasn't just a property dispute anymore. They were attacking my honor, using the very sacrifice I had made for my country as a weapon to paint me as a lunatic. It was a calculated, despicable act of war. I must have shown something on my face because Ethan's expression softened slightly. He reached out and placed a rough, calloused hand on my shoulder. The simple, solid weight of it was grounding. "Your grandfather, William, he would be so damn proud of you," he said quietly. "He always told me you were the toughest one in that whole family, the only one with real grit." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Simple, unvarnished recognition. It was something I had craved my entire life from my father, from my mother, and had never received. Coming from this old warrior, this man who understood the code of honor my grandfather lived by, it meant more than any medal. It was validation from a fellow soldier. My throat felt tight. "Thank you, Marine," I managed to say, the words thick with emotion. He gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. "Don't thank me. Just don't let those bastards win." I nodded, my resolve hardening into something unbreakable. I won't disappoint him. I left the stable with a renewed sense of purpose. The battlefield had been defined. This was no longer just about a house or an inheritance. It was about my name, my service, and my grandfather's legacy. And I now had a new, urgent objective: find out what was in those crates and expose the secret they were hiding in the basement. Information without confirmation is just noise. Ethan's intelligence was valuable, but it wasn't actionable. Not yet. I needed proof. That night, I decided to stop being a passive observer and start being an active operator. It was time to launch a special operation of my own. Under the cloak of a moonless, overcast sky, I moved. My objective was the side of the house, where a small grated vent for the basement was partially hidden by overgrown rose bushes. My grandmother's, now neglected and thorny. My training took over completely. I moved silently, my senses sharp, every step deliberate. I used a simple, handheld RF jammer to temporarily disrupt the wireless signal of the 2 security cameras covering the backyard. It would only give me a 90-second window, but that was all I needed. I didn't break in. That would make me a criminal. Instead, I carefully unscrewed the vent cover, my fingers working quickly. From my pocket, I pulled a device no bigger than a quarter, a micro GSM bug with a high-sensitivity microphone. I affixed it to the inside of the air duct, where it would be invisible, and replaced the cover, tightening the screws just enough to be secure but not so much as to show they'd been tampered with. The entire process took 47 seconds. I was clear of the property before the camera signals blinked back online. OPSEC was second nature. The next morning, I sat in the truck and dialed into the device. The audio was surprisingly clear. I could hear the low, rhythmic hum of machinery, confirming the abnormal power consumption. Then, voices. The first was my brother-in-law, Mark. "The shipment from the West Coast is on schedule," he was saying to someone. "ETA is Thursday." An unfamiliar voice with a slight accent replied, "And the quality is the same. No compromises." "Top grade," Mark assured him. "My guy guarantees it." My heart was pounding. This was it. This was confirmation of an illegal operation. I was about to disconnect and forward the recording to Anna when a third voice spoke, and the world stopped. The voice was calm, authoritative, and chillingly familiar. It was the voice of my father, Richard John. "If the major gets nosy," he said, his tone as cold and sharp as splintered ice, "there will be no warnings. Terminate contact. Is that understood?" The blood in my veins turned to slush. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had held on to a tiny, irrational sliver of hope that he was somehow a pawn in this, manipulated by Mark and Claire. But that hope was just incinerated. The way he spoke, the command in his voice. He wasn't just complicit, he was in charge. My father was the commanding officer of the operation to destroy me. My hands were shaking as I sent the encrypted audio file to Anna. And then, as if on cue, the enemy counterattack began. It came as an encrypted email to my official military inbox, a space they should never have been able to access. The sender was anonymous. The subject line was 6 simple, terrifying words. "We know what you are doing." My training screamed at me not to open it, but I had to. The body of the email contained a single, high-resolution photo taken from an upstairs window of the house the night before. It was me, a ghostly figure in the dark, my face illuminated for a split second by my phone as I checked the time. Attached to the email was a password-protected PDF file. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text from an untraceable number. One word. The password. "Traitor!" My breath hitched. With a trembling finger, I typed it in. The file opened. It was a copy of my official military psychological evaluation. But it had been altered, doctored. Entire paragraphs were fabricated, filled with clinical-sounding lies about emotional instability, paranoia, and violent tendencies linked to combat stress. It was Claire's rumor, weaponized and given the veneer of official documentation. Another text message appeared. "Drop the lawsuit, walk away, or this document gets forwarded to the Pentagon. Your career is over." They had made a fatal mistake. They thought this would make me afraid. They thought they could use my service, my uniform, my entire identity as a weapon against me. But they had forgotten something fundamental. They weren't just attacking Sophie John, the forgotten daughter. They had launched a direct cyber attack against a major in the United States Army. And they had done it on my turf. I didn't panic. I acted. I scrolled through my contacts, my fingers steady now, my rage a cold, clarifying force. I found the name I was looking for, Isaac Ng, a ghost. One of the best cybersecurity analysts I'd ever worked with at US Cybercom, now attached to an intelligence unit in Stuttgart, Germany. He answered immediately. Sophie, to what do I owe the honor? Isaac, I have a blue-on-blue situation, I said, using the term for an attack from a friendly, or in this case, a family source. My voice was devoid of emotion. I'm the target of a cyber threat. I need a trace and a deep dive. Priority, Zulu. Zulu was the highest priority. It meant drop everything. Isaac didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Understood, he said, his tone all business. Send me the package. We're initiating Operation Guardian Angel. ComSec protocols are in effect. We'll find them. My cheap motel room, with its stained carpet and flickering fluorescent light, became my tactical operations center. I forwarded the entire data package to Isaac's secure server. Within minutes, he was back on a heavily encrypted line. Got it, he said. My team is on it. They poked the wrong bear, Major. The next hour was the longest of my life. I watched the progress on my laptop as Isaac's team worked. They were digital ghosts, moving through the dark corners of the internet with terrifying speed. They peeled back the layers of the threat like an onion. The email originated from a proxy server in Eastern Europe, a dead end. But they found the digital receipt. The server had been rented with a stolen credit card, which was then traced back to a disposable crypto account, which was finally traced back to its initial funding source, a credit card belonging to Mark Thatcher. It was the opening they needed. With Mark's name as a key, they went deeper. They breached the firewalls of his transportation company's servers with an elegance that was almost beautiful. And then, the floodgates opened. They found everything. Shipping manifests for restricted electronic components, a complex web of shell companies used to launder money with Ravencrest Holdings at the center. And then, the final damning piece of evidence, a scanned copy of a lease agreement for a secret, off-the-books warehouse on the outskirts of town. The purpose of the warehouse was listed as storage. The signature on the lease belonged to the mastermind, the man pulling all the strings, Richard John. I stared at the screen, at the elegant, familiar signature of my father. Everything fell into place. The lies, the cruelty, the house, the threats. It was all connected. It was all part of this. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a criminal enterprise, and I was going to dismantle it. The first volley in their new campaign wasn't fired with an email. It was launched in the court of public opinion. Anna called me late in the afternoon, her voice tight with a fury she rarely showed. They've gone public, she said. Check the town community page on Facebook. My hands felt cold as I pulled up the page, and there it was. A long saccharine post written by my sister, Claire. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. She spoke of her deep and abiding love for her troubled younger sister. She painted a tragic portrait of a decorated soldier, my portrait, whose mind had been sadly ravaged by the unseen scars of war. She vaguely alluded to my erratic behavior and unfortunate delusions, framing her family's actions as a desperate attempt to protect me from myself. She ended the post by asking for the community's prayers and understanding during this painful family crisis. It was brilliant, and it was devastating. Beneath the post, a flood of comments poured in, hundreds of them. So sorry you're going through this, Claire. Sending prayers to your family. Thank her for her service, but she clearly needs help. They had successfully painted me as a broken, mentally unstable veteran, a ticking time bomb. They weren't just trying to win a lawsuit, they were trying to erase my credibility as a human being. They were isolating me, turning the entire town against me before I could even speak. The rage that simmered inside me was cold and still. They had crossed a line. That evening was the annual town hall meeting, a public forum for discussing local planning and community projects. It was the perfect stage for the kind of person my father had always pretended to be, the concerned, upstanding citizen. Anna and I had planned to attend anyway, just to observe. Now, it felt like we were walking into an ambush. "You don't have to do this," Anna said softly as we parked a block away from the historic town hall building. "Yes," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I do." I wasn't wearing my usual civilian clothes. I had spent the last hour preparing. Tonight, I was wearing my full Army service uniform. The deep blue jacket, the perfectly creased gray trousers, the polished black shoes. On my chest, my ribbons were a quiet testament to 15 years of my life. This wasn't a costume. It was my armor. It was my truth. We slipped into the back of the crowded auditorium just as my father, Richard John, was taking the podium. He looked distinguished in his tailored suit, his voice smooth and reassuring as he spoke about a new park project. He used words like community, integrity, and family values. He spoke of creating a safe space for the children of the town to grow and thrive. The hypocrisy was so thick I could barely breathe. He received a warm round of applause as he finished. And then Claire stood up from her seat in the front row. Her performance was flawless. She dabbed at a non-existent tear, her voice trembling slightly for effect. "I'd also like to take this opportunity," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room, "to thank this wonderful community for its support. Our family's going through a difficult time right now, with my sister, who, as some of you know, isn't well." Every head in the room turned. Every pair of eyes landed on me, sitting in the back, a soldier in full dress uniform. I could see the pity, the suspicion, the confirmation of the lies they had read online. That was it. That was the last straw. The final, unforgivable insult. A profound calm settled over me. The anger vanished, replaced by a cold, absolute clarity. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I pitched my voice just as I had been trained to do on the parade grounds at West Point. It was a command voice, clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd and filling the entire auditorium. "My name is Major Sophie John, United States Army." The room fell dead silent. Every eye was locked on me. Claire's face went pale. My father's confident smile faltered. "I am not unwell," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the town council. "I am an active duty officer with 15 years of decorated service to this country. And I am the victim of a conspiracy to commit fraud perpetrated by the very people you just heard from." A collective gasp went through the room. Claire stammered, You wouldn't dare." I turned my full attention to my father, who was frozen behind the podium. I spoke to him not as a daughter, but as a prosecutor delivering a final indictment. "You speak of family values, Mr. John. Is it a family value to forge your daughter's signature on a legal document?" His face turned ashen. "Is it a family value to run a criminal enterprise out of the basement of the home my grandfather built with his own 2 hands?" The crowd began to murmur, the tide of their opinion shifting with every word I spoke. "Is it a family value to threaten to destroy the career of a soldier to cover up your own crimes?" Finally, I turned to Claire, whose face was a mask of disbelief and fury. "And you," I said, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "You speak of support? Is this your support? Throwing me out of my home, slandering my name and my service record in a public forum?" This was the moment, the catharsis, the release of a lifetime of suppressed pain and injustice. It felt like I was taking my first true breath. She just stared at me, speechless. If you have ever had to stand up for yourself, for your truth, when it felt like the whole world was against you, hit that like button. And if you are standing with Major Sophie John in this moment, I want you to comment the single word, honor, down below. Show them she is not alone. I took a slow, deliberate step into the aisle. Then another. Anna rose and fell into step just behind me, her briefcase held firmly in her hand. Inside it was the temporary restraining order, a tangible piece of the truth. We walked down the central aisle, the crowd parting before us as if we were a force of nature. My eyes never left my father's. The mask of the respected community leader had crumbled, revealing the desperate, cornered criminal beneath. The charade was over. As we reached the front of the room, I stopped and looked from him to my sister. "This war," I said, my voice echoing in the stunned silence, "will not be fought on Facebook. It will be fought in federal court." The aftermath of the town hall meeting was a blur of muted chaos. We left before the council could officially adjourn, the shocked faces of the community members a surreal backdrop to our strategic retreat. The declaration of war had been made in public. Now, the real work would begin in private. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. His voice was low and serious. "Meet me at the diner on Main Street. Come alone." I found him in a booth at the back of the brightly lit, classic American diner, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. He didn't waste time. After I sat down, he slid a small, heavy object across the Formica tabletop. It was an old iron key, pitted with rust, the kind that went to a heavy, old-fashioned lock. "Your grandfather gave this to me before he passed," Ethan said, his eyes holding mine. "He told me to hold onto it and only give it to you when you truly needed it." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. His exact words were, "When the vultures start circling, give this to my general." My breath caught in my throat. I knew instantly what it was for. The oak box, my trophy case. The one my grandfather had built for me, the one I thought had been lost forever, likely burned for firewood. The fact that he had foreseen this, that he had made a contingency plan with his most trusted friend, sent a shiver down my spine. That evening, Ethan drove me to a place I never would have found on my own. A sterile, anonymous self-storage facility on the industrial outskirts of town. He led me down a long concrete hallway illuminated by buzzing fluorescent lights to a roll-up metal door marked Unit 237. He'd been paying the rental fee in cash every year since my grandfather's death, a silent guardian of this final secret. The door groaned in protest as he rolled it up, revealing the dark interior. And there it was, sitting alone in the center of the empty space, covered in a thin, even layer of dust. The oak box. It was smaller than I remembered, but it felt as heavy as a cornerstone. My heart hammered against my ribs as I knelt before it. The rusty iron key slid into the lock with a gritty sound. It turned with a satisfying, solid clunk. I lifted the heavy lid. The top layer was exactly as I remembered. My academic medals, a science fair ribbon, a certificate for perfect attendance, my letter of acceptance to West Point. Memories of a girl who had tried so desperately to earn her family's approval. But beneath them, my fingers found the edge of a false bottom. I lifted it out. Underneath lay a large waterproof document bag, the kind soldiers use to protect maps and orders from the elements. My hands trembled slightly as I unsealed it. Inside wasn't just one document, but a meticulously organized file. The first was a thick sheaf of papers bound with a legal clip. It was my grandfather's last will and testament, the original copy, notarized by a JAG Corps lawyer from the nearby Army base. The language was clear and unambiguous. He bequeathed the house at 1450 Windmere Lane, and a significant portion of his savings to me and me alone. Tucked inside the will was a handwritten letter on his old stationery. I recognized his strong, deliberate script immediately. "My dearest Sophie," it began. "If you are reading this, it means the vultures have landed, just as I feared. I have seen the greed in your father's heart and the jealousy in your sister's. It has been a shadow over them for many years. I am leaving you this house not for its monetary value, but because it is our legacy. Your grandmother's roses, the porch swing I built, the walls that heard your first laugh, that is our family's true history. Protect it." I had to pause, my vision blurring with tears. Then I read the last line. "And always remember this, my little general. A soldier never fights alone." But he had left me more than just words. The final item in the bag was the true weapon. It was a small black leather-bound notebook, a logbook. I opened it, and my tears of sorrow turned into tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude. He had seen everything. For years, my grandfather had been keeping a detailed chronicle. He'd recorded dates and times of my father's suspicious business calls. He'd written down, verbatim, some of Claire's most cutting remarks about me. He documented his growing suspicions about Mark Thatcher's late-night activities. He had even, with the sharp eye of an old soldier, jotted down the serial numbers of a few pieces of specialized electronic equipment he'd seen Mark and his associates carry into the basement. He hadn't been a frail old man, oblivious to the darkness around him. He was Sergeant William John, an intelligence officer until his last breath. He hadn't just left me a house. He had left me an entire arsenal. The next morning, my motel room was officially transformed into a war room. I spread the contents of the box across the cheap bedspread. When Anna arrived, she stared at it all in stunned silence. She read the will, the letter, and then the notebook. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief and professional excitement. "Sophie," she said, her voice filled with awe. "This changes everything. This isn't a civil case anymore. This is a federal criminal case." We didn't hesitate. Anna made the call. She laid out the entire situation to a contact she trusted at the FBI's Richmond field office. Forgery, wire fraud, conspiracy, and a potential interstate trafficking ring involving restricted electronics, all laundered through a shell corporation. The dominoes began to fall, and they fell fast. My small personal war had just become a major federal investigation. The pieces were all in place. Anna was the legal commander. Isaac and his team in Germany were my signals intelligence unit, providing the irrefutable digital evidence. Ethan Miller was my star witness, the boots on the ground. And I, armed with my grandfather's final dispatch, was ready. We were going to finish this fight. The United States federal courthouse was a world away from the chaos of my life. It was a place of solemn, heavy silence, all polished wood and cold marble, where the air itself seemed to vibrate with the weight of consequence. The American flag stood vast and silent behind the judge's bench, a constant, unblinking witness. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand. The Army service uniform felt less like armor now and more like my own skin. As I sat down, I didn't look at the defendant's table. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes on me. I focused instead on the 12 men and women in the jury box. They were the ones who mattered now. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, led me through my testimony. I presented the facts of the case calmly and logically, just as I would deliver a mission briefing. There was no emotion in my voice, only clarity. I was no longer the victim. I was the primary witness to a federal crime. Then came the cross-examination. My father's lawyer, a slick man with a gold watch, approached me with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Major John," he began, his voice dripping with false concern. "You've served this country with distinction, and we all know that the stresses of combat can linger. Isn't it possible that these events, this family disagreement, have been magnified in your mind due to the pressures of your profession?" He was trying to plant the seed. The same seed Claire had planted on Facebook. The unstable soldier, the broken veteran. I didn't answer him. Instead, I turned my body slightly, just enough to address the jury directly. I looked at each of them, one by one. "I have undergone 3 mandatory psychological evaluations during my career," I said, my voice as steady and clear as a bell. "Every single one has concluded that I am fully fit to command national-level cybersecurity operations. The only instability I've ever faced, counselor, was the betrayal from my own family." The lawyer's smile vanished. He had no more questions. After that, the dam broke. The evidence the prosecution had amassed was unleashed not as a trickle, but as a flood. It was an overwhelming barrage of facts, each one a hammer blow against the fortress of lies my family had built. A forensic expert took the stand and showed, with enlarged side-by-side comparisons, how my signature had been crudely forged on the deed transfer. The courtroom screens then lit up with Isaac Ng's digital forensics, presented by an FBI cyber agent. He walked the jury through the complex data trail, a spiderweb of IP addresses and crypto accounts that all led back to one man, Mark Thatcher. Then Ethan Miller, in his old Marine Corps dress blues jacket, took the stand. His testimony was simple, powerful, and unshakable. He described the unmarked black trucks, the the heavy sealed containers and the late-night meetings in the basement. Next, the prosecution's financial analyst presented a simple, devastating flowchart. It showed the money from Mark's shell corporation, Ravencrest Holdings, flowing directly into a personal account opened by Claire Thatcher just days after the fraudulent sale of the house. From the defendant's table, I heard a small, choked sob. It was Claire. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling under the weight of hard numbers. Mark sat beside her, sweating, his face pale. Only my father, Richard John, remained impassive, a statue of arrogant denial, seemingly confident that he was untouchable. He was wrong. The prosecution calls its final piece of evidence to be entered, Ms. Davies announced, holding up my grandfather's small black notebook. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Objection. Hearsay. This is not hearsay, Your Honor, Ms. Davies countered smoothly. These are the contemporaneous notes of a deceased witness, documenting events as he observed them. I'll allow it, the judge said, his voice booming in the silent room. Ms. Davies read from the notebook. She read my grandfather's observations of my father's suspicious phone calls. She read his account of Mark's secret deliveries. She read his heartbroken notes on Claire's cruelty. With every word, I could see my father's composure beginning to crack. A muscle in his jaw began to twitch. The statue was beginning to fracture, and then the final, fatal blow. Finally, Ms. Davies said, the prosecution would like to play an audio recording recovered by the FBI from a listening device. A speaker crackled to life. The humming of machinery filled the courtroom, followed by the muffled voices of Mark and his associate. And then, a third voice, sharp and clear, cut through the noise. My father's voice. If the major gets nosy, there will be no warnings. Terminate contact. Is that understood? A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Richard John physically slumped in his chair as if he'd been shot. His face was a ghastly shade of white. His eyes, for the first time, were wide with pure, undiluted terror. The game was over. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were grim and resolute. The foreman, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stood and handed the verdict to the bailiff. He couldn't look at the defendant's table. The judge read the verdict. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, the jury finds the defendant, Claire Thatcher, guilty. A wail escaped Claire's lips. On the charges of money laundering and racketeering, the jury finds the defendant, Mark Thatcher, guilty. Mark stared blankly ahead, a broken man. And on the charges of conspiracy, fraud, and being the principal of a criminal enterprise, the jury finds the defendant, Richard John, guilty. My father closed his eyes. The statue had crumbled into dust. At the sentencing, the judge was merciless. Claire Thatcher, for her role in the forgery and conspiracy, 6 years in federal prison. Mark Thatcher, for fraud, money laundering, and racketeering, 8 years. And Richard John, as the mastermind and leader of the criminal enterprise, 10 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. As the U.S. Marshals moved forward, the sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the silent courtroom. One set for my sister, another for her husband, and a third for my father. I didn't watch them being led away. I couldn't. Instead, my eyes were fixed on the flag that hung behind the judge's bench, its stars and stripes a silent testament to the ideals I had sworn to defend. Justice had been served. The moment the courtroom doors swung open, we were hit by a wall of noise and flashing lights. Reporters shouted my name, shoving microphones and cameras toward my face. It was a chaotic storm of public victory. Shielded by Anna on one side and Ethan on the other, I moved through the crowd like a ship through turbulent waters, my face a mask of neutrality. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. I hadn't won a prize. I had simply survived. The feeling I expected, elation, vindication, triumph, never came. Back in the stale air of my motel room that evening, there was only silence. The war was over. The enemy had been defeated. But the battlefield was the ruins of my own family, and the cost had been everything. I sat alone in the dark, The blinking red light of the smoke detector, the only company I had. I had won. But I was also the only one left standing. My grandfather used to read the Bible to me sometimes, not for religious reasons, but for the stories and the wisdom. A line he often quoted drifted into my mind. And the truth will set you free. I had the truth now. It had been validated in a federal court of law. But this freedom, it felt heavy. It tasted like ash. A few weeks later, after the media frenzy had died down and I was preparing my return to Fort Gordon, a letter arrived. It was from a federal penitentiary in West Virginia. The handwriting was my mother's. My heart didn't leap with hope. It simply steeled itself for one final blow. I was right. The letter was not an apology. It was a vessel of pure, undiluted venom. She accused me of being selfish, of being cruel, of single-handedly destroying the family for my own pride. She never once mentioned my father's crimes or my sister's greed. In her version of reality, I was the villain. The final lines were written with a shaking, furious hand. "You can have that house," she wrote, "but you will die in it, alone." I read the words, and I felt nothing. The anger I might have felt weeks ago was gone. The hurt had been cauterized. All that was left was a profound and weary pity for this woman who was so trapped in her own lies that she could no longer see the truth. She was a prisoner long before the gates of that penitentiary closed behind her husband and other daughter. I folded the letter neatly, placed it inside an empty cardboard box from the closet, and slid the box onto the top shelf. It was a burial. The final, quiet closing of a chapter that should have ended years ago. Before I left town for good, there was one last place I had to visit. The local cemetery was quiet and peaceful, a small patch of green nestled among old oak trees. I found their headstone easily, a simple granite slab engraved with the names William and Eleanor John. I knelt down and placed a small bouquet of white roses, my grandmother's favorite, on the grass. "I did it, Grandpa," I whispered to the silent stone. "I protected our legacy. I hope you're proud." As I stood there, lost in thought, the sound of a car pulling up on the gravel path behind me made me turn. An older woman was getting out of a familiar-looking sedan. It took me a moment to place her. It was my aunt, my mother's younger sister, Carol. We hadn't spoken in a decade. She had distanced herself from my parents' toxicity long ago. She walked toward me, her face etched with a sad, gentle kindness. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't the tentative, obligatory hug of a distant relative. It was a hug filled with a lifetime of unspoken sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Sophie," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she pulled back. "I'm so sorry. I always knew how they treated you, how my sister and her husband. I knew it wasn't right. But I was a coward. I didn't want to cause more trouble, so I stayed away." Tears streamed down her face. "You did what all of us should have done years ago," she said, her hand gripping my arm. "You were brave. You are so brave." And in that moment, something inside me that had been broken and frozen for 37 years began to thaw. It wasn't a pardon from my mother. It wasn't an apology from my father or sister. It was something smaller, but infinitely more real. It was a single, solitary voice from my own bloodline, telling me that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the problem. It was a small act of healing, but it was enough. A few days later, Anna met me in front of the house. The police tape was gone, but it still felt like a crime scene. It looked cold, empty, haunted by the ghosts of what it should have been. "So," Anna said gently, standing beside me on the sidewalk, "it's yours. What's the plan? Sell it? Move back in?" I stared at the house my grandfather had built, the porch swing he had hung, the front window where my grandmother used to watch for my school bus. I had fought for this place. I had won it back. But it wasn't a home anymore. It was a monument to a war. I turned to Anna, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was a peaceful one, a serene one. "I'm not going to sell it," I said, "and I'm not going to live here." Anna looked at me, puzzled. "Then what?" a new sense of purpose, clean and clear, settled over me. I have another idea, I said, my gaze drifting back to the house. An idea I think Grandpa would have loved. 1 year later, the house at 1450 Windmere Lane was still standing, but it was no longer the same place. The ghost had been exorcised. The chill was gone, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the thermostat and everything to do with purpose. The for sale sign, a stark red wound on the lawn, had vanished long ago. In its place stood a beautiful, handcrafted sign made of solid oak, the letters carved with care and precision. It read, "The William House, a sanctuary for women veterans." The idea that had come to me in the aftermath of the trial, the one I knew my grandfather would have loved, had become a reality. Using every penny of the inheritance he had left me and the significant damages awarded in the civil suit, I established a nonprofit foundation. The house was no longer a monument to a war. It had been reborn as a fortress of healing. It was now a safe harbor, a transitional home for women who had served their country and were navigating the often turbulent waters of returning to civilian life. It was a place to decompress, to find resources, to simply breathe without having to be on guard. This afternoon, I was in the front yard, on my knees in the soft soil. The overgrown, thorny remnants of my grandmother's rose bushes had been carefully pruned and tended to. Now, new life was sprouting, and we were adding to it. Alongside me were 3 of the home's current residents. There was Maria, a former marine logistics specialist with a wicked sense of humor, Jenna, a quiet Air Force drone pilot still finding her voice, and Sarah, a young combat medic barely 24 years old, whose hands had saved lives under unimaginable pressure. The sound of laughter, real, unforced laughter, drifted through the cool autumn air. It was a sound I never thought I'd hear in this place again. We worked together, digging, planting, our conversation easy and rambling. "You know," Sarah said, pausing to wipe a smudge of dirt from her cheek, "the nightmares are the worst part. It's not the things you see, it's the sounds. I can still hear the helicopter blades, the shouting." She trailed off, her eyes distant for a moment. No one rushed to fill the silence. There was no awkwardness, no need for platitudes. We just let her words hang in the air, a shared acknowledgement of the invisible scars we all carried in different ways. I moved a little closer, my hand still in the dirt next to hers. I didn't offer advice. I didn't say it will get better. I just listened. I was just there. After a moment, she took a breath and gave me a small, grateful smile. "Anyway," she said, her voice a little brighter, "my therapist says gardening is good for grounding. Something about getting your hands in the dirt." "Your therapist is a smart woman," Maria chimed in, holding up a new rose bush. "Where do you want this bad boy, Major?" Major. They all called me that, but the title felt different here. It wasn't about rank, it was about respect. A respect that was mutual. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of earth and the quiet strength of these women, a profound truth settled over me. Family isn't always the blood you're born with. Sometimes it's the family you choose. Sometimes it's the tribe you build from shared scars, forged in the fires of common experience and cemented with unwavering respect. This was my family now. This was my home. Later that evening, inside, a fire crackled warmly in the hearth my grandfather had built. The house was filled with the comforting smell of a chicken roasting in the oven. On the mantelpiece, in the place of honor, sat the oak box, my footlocker, my trophy case. But its contents had changed. The old medals were still there, tucked away at the bottom like a foundation. But resting on top were new treasures, a different kind of award. There was a stack of handwritten thank you notes from women who had passed through the William house and found their footing again. There was a photo of Maria, beaming, holding the keys to her new apartment. There was a newspaper clipping about Jenna starting her own small business. There was a childish drawing of a flower, given to me by the young son of a veteran who had stayed with us for a month. These were the new trophies. This was the new mission. My grandfather's true legacy wasn't the brick and mortar of this house. It was the spirit of service that he had lived by, the code of protection that he had passed down to me. He was an intelligence officer until his last breath, gathering the arsenal I would need to win my war. Now, I was continuing his work, not by fighting enemies, but by building a sanctuary. I was protecting his legacy in the only way that truly mattered. A few weeks later, I was back at Fort Gordon, Georgia. The air was thick with the familiar, humid heat of the South. I walked down a long, quiet hallway inside the U.S. Army Cyber Command headquarters, my polished shoes clicking softly on the linoleum floor. I stopped in front of a large polished mahogany plaque on the wall, the command's wall of honor. My name was there, etched onto a small brass plate, Major Sophie John. It was still bright, still secure. The career they had tried to destroy, the honor they had tried to tarnish, was intact. But as I looked at it, I no longer felt the lonely pride of a solitary soldier. The name on the wall was part of me, but it wasn't all of me anymore. I knew now that my duty, my mission, was bigger than this hallway. It extended beyond the firewalls I protected and the classified networks I secured. Whether I was on a digital battlefield defending against a cyber attack or in a small garden in Virginia, listening to a fellow veteran share her pain, the core mission was the same: to protect. I had fought the most brutal war of my life, not in some distant foreign land, but in the quiet suburbs of my own hometown. And I had won. But the victory wasn't in the prison sentences or the legal vindication. The true victory wasn't in destroying my enemies. It was in my refusal to be destroyed by them. It was in building something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of their betrayal. Standing there, in the heart of my military world, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me, a calm that had been earned through fire and forged in resolve. The war was over. The ghosts were silent. Major Sophie John stood steady, whole, and ready for whatever mission came next. My war is over, but I know for many of you, the battle for your peace and dignity is a daily one. If this journey has proven anything, it is that our value is not defined by the family we were born into, but by the honor we build for ourselves. Your worth is non-negotiable. Please, share your own story of resilience in the comments below. Your words could be the lifeline someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for listening. Subscribe for more stories of strength and share this with anyone who needs to be reminded that they are not alone.